Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to introduce our next speaker, someone who I respect immensely, who has contributed to the Leadership New Zealand Mana Moana and Tuputai programs over the years, someone that I've learnt a lot about in terms of things like the doctrine of discovery, never heard about it before. Tina Ngata is Ngati Porou. She is a researcher and a scholar. She's the author of Kia Mau, Resisting Colonial Fictions. Her work involves advocacy for the environment, Indigenous and human rights, which includes local, national and international initiatives that highlight the role of settler colonialism in issues such as climate change and waste pollution, which promote Indigenous conservation as best practice for a globally sustainable future. Please welcome e wahine toa Tina Ngata.
Tēnā tātou katoa e te tuatahi nei ka mihi ki te mana o tēnei whenua te Aotearoa. Mai tēnei mokopuna a hikurangi maunga a Waiapu awa, te urunga mai o te rā nei ka mihi ki a koutou. I te tuarua ki te whānau te papa koutou kua whakawātea te ara I raro I te marumaru o te wāhi ngaro nei ka mihi ki a koutou. O tira ki a tātou katoa kua whakarau I ke mai rungi te kaupapa o te rā nei. Tēnei te mihi ki a koutou katoa. Ko Tina Ngata tōku ingoa, hu uri no Ngāti Porou. Kia ora. Thank you for the invite to come and speak on this issue. I'm really excited to be amongst some of the people today when I saw the names on the list, especially Wheli. I'm a really big fangirl of you, Wheli. I hope I get to get your autograph later on. And so I guess what I'd like to start off by saying, whenever I am asked to speak on an issue, I always try to ensure that I ground what I'm saying in the context of place and time and community as much as possible. And we've already heard some of those contexts this morning. And that practice comes from a saying that mine and Kahurangi's uncle offered to me one time, which is, whakapapatia tō kōrero tina, kei rangirua. And that means provide the genealogy for your kōrero, or it's going to confuse people. But in our beautiful metaphorical way, it also means ground your kōrero into papa tuanuku, or it will float away into rangi and not be relevant. And I love that saying because it's so centred here in this place, in Aotearoa, in the knowledge and the language and the ways of knowing that have grown out of this soil and grown out of these waters. And it's still relevant to today's context, and we're shaped by our historical experiences that are being crafted with every passing moment. And we're shaped by the people and the place that surrounds us. And so that's the context within which we must ground our understandings of these concepts. So what is our context today? We're here in Te Papatonga Rewa, the repository of our national stories and our national identity. We're here on Te Atiawa land. In fact, we're above Te Atiawa waters. At one time, the shoreline was quite further inland, and these waters connect us to Te Moana Nui a Kiwa and cement us as members of the big blue continent, the Pacific nation. These are the waters of Tara, son of Whātonga, grandson of Toi, who were courageous voyagers across that big blue continent. And from then, they have had many descendants, many generations who have survived some of the most incredible crises, natural disasters, conflict, the greatest disaster of colonisation and all that has come with it. And our Moana region is a colonised region. And we are a colonised nation. And if you understand what colonisation entails, you'll know that it is an inherently racist, oppressive experience that is, in this context of Aotearoa, not historical but enduring. We are members of a nation that was forged under a shared agreement, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and we are governed under a system that is a violation of that agreement, that being the New Zealand Parliament. Now, don't at me about that on Twitter. That's already been acknowledged by the Crown Judiciary, the Waitangi Tribunal. So we're governed under a system of what could be called racist entitlement. And we are a member of what is also considered the economic global north. And that's a nation that has the same level of economic privilege as European and North American nations, and like those nations, that wealth and privilege has grown out of a multi-century process of dispossession, both here and overseas. We have, in recent years, and yesterday was our second anniversary of the experience of the most brutal extension of racist entitlement, that being the terrorist attacks upon the Christchurch mosques. And we're also here during Pride Week, the week where we can openly celebrate all of our whānau to be who we are in our fullest. So what does it mean in this context, living on these lands and on these waters, members of a moana continent under a violated treaty that apparently matters enough to form a government, but not enough to honour in full? What does it mean in that context to lead? Well, one thing I think I can confidently say is that good leadership comes from trust. And Ashley Bloomfield was just reiterating that himself. And that trust can't be forced, it has to be inspired. Trust in Aotearoa between the Crown and marginalised communities is not easily won. Historically, these communities have been betrayed so many times that handing trust over is at best a foolhardy act. And in fact, our survival as Māori has depended upon us not trusting the Crown, but in fact challenging it and pushing back for about 168 years now. So earning the trust of those whom have been disregarded for so long requires first for you to see us. Here in Te Papa Tongarewa, it is the act of being seen that knits you into the national story, that makes you a part of our nation. So we require you to see us in our entirety as people who are passionate about protecting our families and for whom it has never been a reasonable act to expect anybody to do that for us. See our histories, see what has shaped us, and that will require you to see yourself in relation to us as well. People often refer to marginalised communities as vulnerable populations, vulnerable to COVID, vulnerable to climate change. These vulnerabilities that people are referring to did not happen per chance, and they're not natural parts of our communities. They were built into our communities through colonisation. A vulnerable health profile is not a Māori or Pacific characteristic, it is a colonial inevitability. Climate vulnerability is not a random feature, it is a colonial inevitability. And the role that colonisation has had and the culpability of the Crown in building those vulnerabilities around Māori and Pacific communities makes any lack of response to those factors simply unforgivable. COVID, in particular, has shown us just how unseen marginalised groups are. The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres noted that COVID-19 has exacerbated the vulnerability of the least protected in our societies. We know who that means in Aotearoa. We know who the least protected are. They are our communities of colour, our refugee communities, our LGBTQIA communities, our tangata moana communities, and our tangata whenua communities. We know that our communities of South Auckland are unseen sacrificial offerings that secure the safety of our nation. We know here and overseas that there are unseen, oppressed hands all over the goods that we order from the safety of our homes. We know that in times of natural disasters, it's our LGBTQ community who are least likely to be offered assistance. So inspiring trust requires us to see these truths, to see our people, and to see yourself in that story. And in seeing us, we need you to see the good in us, the strength in us. So often, I have heard about this expectation for people to trust the Crown, but for communities that are hyper-surveilled, hyper-incarcerated and contained, who are not even trusted to raise our own children, it doesn't feel like we're the ones with the dominant trust issues. When we stepped out in Wharekahika to put a checkpoint in place to protect our communities in Ngāti Porou, we saw the comments being made publicly about us being divisive and radical vigilantes, and it took the MPs and the Crown authorities and even our own iwi to trust in us as a hapu, to trust in our intent, that we really just wanted to protect our elders, and we had strong faith in our ability to do that. And it took trusting in us in order for a relationship to grow that was incredibly effective. And just last week, our whole checkpoint crew were warranted as full Māori wardens, trained in disaster response, first aid, fire safety, community security and traffic management. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, naysayers. And that's 12 more people who can now serve our community in times of need alongside civil defence and police. So we need you to see us, to see yourself in relation to us. We need you to see the good in us and to trust us back. And the next thing I would like to say is that inspiring trust requires sustained acts of integrity. And I'm sure Sinead can relate to this, is that one act of integrity will get you noticed and it's appreciated. But if you fully understand the context of this nation, you'll know there's a lot to work through. There's a historical balance sheet at play, and you only have to read through a few settlement records to know that balancing the integrity sheet is going to take some time and a lot of work. We're talking about, internationally, nationally 250, internationally over 500 years of a global process of colonisation that has created and embedded a system of injustice across multiple dimensions of our society. It's a 500-year story that includes genocide, slavery, exploitation of lands, exploitation of people, and its legacy surrounds us today in health inequities, in wealth and poverty extremes, in environmental devastation, in pandemics, and in climate catastrophes. And if we keep ignoring the injustice and its role in our context today, our integrity will not survive that process. That story is not going away, and in fact the voices around it are getting louder and the allies are growing, and it's not the kind of leadership, ignoring that is not the kind of leadership that will take us into the future that we need for our mokopuna. So finally, and this is related to trust but just extends a little further, we must have faith. In spite of everything that's happened, everything that we've been through in this last year, in the last 250 years, in spite of the violence of March 15th, in spite of it all, we have to have faith that we can come through this together in order to keep coming back to the table, to keep returning to the relationship and working on it, to keep waking up in the morning, to keep walking back into the fray. We need to have faith. I have faith in my people. I have unshakable faith in tangata whenua and tangata moana. I have faith in our atua. I have faith also in Te Tiriti o Waitangi, deep faith in Te Tiriti o Waitangi as our relationship document. And I've seen incredible acts of allyship and grassroots movements that give me increasing faith in tangata tiriti as well. And faith is catching. When you have strong faith, those around you will be inspired as well. So that's what I wanted to leave you with today, these characteristics of courageous leadership for our context. See us in our entirety. See yourself in your entirety and in our story. See the good in us and trust us back. Sustain your integrity and sustain your faith. That is what it will take to embed us in this story of courageous leadership in Aotearoa, to make it relevant to these lands and waters, to ground it in Papatuanuku, to have it take seed, give fruit, provide for us and shelter us all. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.